Well, hey everybody, as we begin our time together today, I want to tell you about a study that took place a few years ago when it looked at the people who watched TikTok a lot during the pandemic. And here's the thing, let's be real. I mean, most of us probably could have been a part of this study. Maybe it wasn't TikTok, but it was another form of social media. But I mean, think about this. What else were we supposed to do when the world shut down than to endlessly scroll through things on our phone? But regardless, here's what this study found, which is really pretty wild. Because through this study, it was discovered that after watching certain videos, especially videos again and again and again, so watching the same videos over and over again, things like songs and dances and quotes, that teenagers who spent all this time doing this, they began repeating some of the sounds or movements that they saw without even thinking about it, without even being aware of it, or maybe even consciously choosing to do it. They just broke out into dance or song or started quoting their favorite shows that they had been watching because they had seen it so many times. Now, just before you stop the video and you say, well, he's just going to tell me to stop spending time on TikTok or social media. And let's be honest, all of us could probably use a break from the endless scrolling. That's not what we're going to talk about. But what we are going to talk about is to talk about seeing the things that you experience, whether it's online or whether it's day to day, seeing how those things impact your life. So in other words, the videos we watch, the video games we play, the music we listen to, the places we hang out, the schools we attend, the accounts that we follow on social media, all of that has potential to impact our words, our thoughts, and our choices, and even more importantly, probably our responses to other people. You see, sometimes what we consume has a way of impacting us more than we know. And here's the thing, is we want to spend some time together today evaluating and elevating the conversation specifically regarding the topics of violence and peace. Now, let me explain what I mean. Is whether you realize it or not, our culture is actually consumed with violence. And I'm sure when you even hear the word violence, probably some things come to mind. Maybe you think about true crime podcasts or documentaries that are dominating our apps today. Or maybe you think about video games or shows or movies that make violence their primary feature. Or maybe you think about music that normalizes violent language and imagery towards others. Or maybe you take it a step further and you think about the mass shootings at schools all over the country, or the military conflicts and wars that are happening all over our world. Or maybe you think about the terrible acts of harm that are reported on the news. You see, violence is everywhere, whether it's apps or songs or Netflix or YouTube or conversations. Violence is there. And if we're being honest, most of us would probably have to admit we don't even notice it. We simply take it in and we don't really flinch. And that's because in our world, violence is almost too normal. Some may even go so far as to say, well, violence is just a part of how our world works. And violence is an unfortunate part of the culture that we live in today. And so because of that, we have to figure out how to live in that world and how to navigate that world. Because violence is so much of a part of our lives, we often don't times notice violence for what it is. And I think that's where the tension really lies and where we want to spend some time today. Is because let's think about how this plays out in our day-to-day lives. For example, you watch a show with a lot of violence, fighting, and death, and eventually we just don't even turn away when the worst of it's happening. Or maybe we listen to songs that are racially insensitive or have sexually violent lyrics, and when we hear those same words repeated in the hallways of our schools, we don't even raise our heads or respond. Or maybe we play intense video games all weekend and we find ourselves being unexpectedly harsh or aggressive towards people that we care about the next day. Or maybe we hear so much about gun violence and school shootings in the news that it's just something we anticipate is going to happen. Or maybe we listen to true crime podcasts during the day and then we can't sleep at night because of what we've heard. You see, some of us may even be living in a violent environment, whether that's at our home, at our school, or in our neighborhood. And I don't know about you, but all those things are unsettling to me. Because I don't want to be the type of person that sees pain or heartbreak or death and hate, and I'm just okay with it. I don't want to change because of the violence that I've seen. And I don't want to start thinking that violence is just a normal way of life. And I definitely won't want to be somebody who always just feels hopeless and never feels hopeful. So what if there's another way to think about this topic? Well, here's the deal. We're not going to necessarily solve the problem of violence today, but we are going to discover a first step that we can take towards peace as we raise the bar for conversations about violence. And to do this, we're going to look at a passage of scripture because during Jesus' life and ministry, he made really clear statements about what he wanted his followers to think about and specifically how he wanted them to interact with the violence in the world around them. And a lot of these statements that he made concerning this topic, they come from a passage that we've entitled the Sermon on the Mount. And in this particular passage, Jesus is speaking to his followers, to this large crowd on the side of a mountain, about how God wants them to live. And it's still applicable for us today. And he kicks off this message by giving them a list of people that he calls blessed. Now, when it comes to that idea of being blessed, you and I probably have an idea of what being blessed looks like. Maybe for us, we say, well, it's somebody that has a lot of money, or it's somebody that has all the things they want, or it's somebody that has their love interest or their crush feel the same way about them, or it's somebody that has a lot of clout or a good reputation. And here's the thing, the people that Jesus was speaking to, their list probably looked different than our list. But people listening back then probably had a list of what blessed looked like too. And that's what makes what Jesus said so unexpected. Because he didn't list a bunch of things that we desire. Instead, he listed a bunch of things that we can be. And so looking at just one, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, he says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Now, the Greek word that's used here for blessed is makarios. And it basically means a deep sense of happiness, fulfillment, or wholeness. So in other words, Jesus was saying this, that in order to be blessed with this lasting sense of fulfillment, we have to choose to be peacemakers. To be people who bring and create peace in any and all circumstances. Now, I know when you hear that, for you and I, chances are you're like, that sounds like a stretch. Because how is it possible for me to be a peacemaker when my siblings won't stop bothering me? Or when my parents are constantly fighting? Or when tragedy is happening in my community? Or violence is still all over social media? How am I supposed to be a peacemaker? And my guess is the people, when they heard Jesus say this for the first time, they probably felt the same way. Because it's important for us to remember that Jesus said this to people who hadn't been in peace for a really long time. In fact, their land had been conquered and they were being ruled by the Roman Empire. And you may remember that the Romans actually used violence as a way to threaten and control them. And so the people listening to Jesus teach this message, they were hurting, they were suffering, and they were probably really angry. They were living in the middle of violence and dealing with a lack of peace that wasn't their fault. So when Jesus tells them, hey, you'll be blessed if you're a peacemaker, they probably had a thought that you and I may have when we hear those words. Is how can we possibly choose to be peacemakers when we're literally surrounded by violence? That's probably a question that we could still wrestle with today. I mean, how can we choose to be a peacemaker when there's so much violence around us? And that's why I think what Jesus says is so powerful and practical. Because if you think about it, violence leads to more violence. Repaying evil with evil, it becomes a vicious cycle. And Jesus knew something that his followers didn't. Because he knew, hey, if you want to experience deep fulfillment in life, deep fulfillment in the midst of the chaos that's around you, you need to choose peace. In fact, you could say it this way, that the most powerful way to change things is through peace. The most powerful way to change things is through peace. And then Jesus even goes further and he says, and you will be called children of God. So that means, in other words, if we live as peacemakers, if we look inward and we find peace in our hearts, we're actually showing the world what God, our Heavenly Father, is like. But Jesus wasn't done, because later on in the Sermon on the Mount, specifically Matthew chapter 6, here's another section of what Jesus taught. He says, the eye is the lamp of the body. And if your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, the whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Now here's the thing. Jesus isn't talking about our literal eyes here, but he's talking about our focus. And if we focus our attention, our time, and our thoughts on good stuff, the stuff that Jesus calls light, then over time you will find more of those things, those good things in your life. But if you focus on things that aren't good, things that Jesus actually labels as darkness, then eventually that will be what comes out in your life. So just imagine if all of a sudden all the lights were to go off in the room that you're sitting in. And at first you think to yourself, wow, it's really dark in here. But after a second or so, your eyes start to adjust. And you can't see things the way you normally would see things, but you see enough to get by. And the longer that you sit there, you're like, okay, the darkness just becomes normal. And then if we flipped on the light switch again, your eyes would struggle to see. The light would feel strange because the darkness had felt so normal. But in a dark room, the person with light has what it takes to start changing things for the better. So imagine yourself again sitting in a dark room, and all of a sudden somebody turns on a flashlight. That person helps other people see more clearly. And when we see more clearly, we can move towards peace and help others walk in that peace as well. You see, this is an example of what Jesus meant when he talked about peacemakers. Because the person with light helps everybody else see more clearly. And I think that's what being a peacemaker really means. Is it's not avoiding the darkness. It's not running from it. And it's not being consumed by it. Instead, it's literally being full of light. And here's what that means for us today. Is that being a peacemaker starts with peace in your heart. Being a peacemaker starts with peace in your heart. You see, Jesus knew that the people he was talking to were sitting in darkness. He knew that all of these things around them were impacting them even if they didn't realize it. And he knew that the world needed to see things more clearly. And so while they may not have been able to stop war or persecution or imprisonment that was surrounding them, they could move through a violent world with peace in their hearts. Because remember, being a peacemaker starts with peace in your heart. So if you and I want to become people who navigate violence in our culture in a healthy way, then we have to start with our own hearts. We have to pursue wholeness. We have to be consumers of the light of the world and the light of Jesus rather, not the light of the world. We have to be the light of the world. And we have to let the light of Jesus be the lens through which we see everything in the world and around us. And you say, okay, that's great, but how do I do that? Well, the first thing is we see violence for what it really is. That we get honest with ourselves about the content that we engage with. Whether it's the stuff we listen to, or the video games we play, or the accounts we follow, the music we listen to on our playlists, the conversations we have at the lunch table, the clickbait articles that we read, whatever it is, don't shrug it off and don't look past it or try to assume that it's no big deal. Instead, ask God to show you what you may not be seeing clearly in it. And let God's light help you see violence for what it is, wherever it is. So first thing that you have to do is you have to see violence for what it is. Then second, you pay attention to the impact. Notice the way that violence may be consuming you, or how engaging with it is basically impacting your thoughts or your words or your choices or your reactions. And pay attention to the way your mood changes when you play a certain video game, or when the impulses you have become more, prevalent in your life after you listen to a certain song, or the way you treat other people after you've been online for several hours. And if you're not sure how that's really playing out in your life, would you be brave enough to ask a trusted adult or somebody close to you to help shine the light to show how that's impacting you? Because if something is impacting you more than you realize, maybe it's a sign you need to take a step back from it. Because to choose not to engage with something like that will affect your peace, and it will actually give you more peace because you're not engaging with it. And then third, focus on peace. Focus on peace. As you begin to notice the way that violence may be impacting you, choose to shift your focus away from the things that are called darkness and onto the things that are called light that help you pursue peace. Now, Paul, one of Jesus' closest followers, gives us an idea of where to start, because in Philippians chapter 4, he writes these words: "Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable, and right and pure, and lovely and admirable. Think about these things. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Then the God of peace will be with you." You see, that's our filter. That when we're not sure if we can focus, if what we're focusing on is really promoting peace, we can think back to Paul's words for guidance. We can ask ourselves, well, is the song I'm listening to, is it honorable? Is the way that this video that I'm watching making me feel good? Is my response to the violence in the world pure and admirable? Am I being kind after binging a certain show? Are my words pure? Are my thoughts true? Because remember, being a peacemaker starts with the peace in your heart. And it all starts with us. And here's the thing, is if we become people who pay attention to violence and we see it for what it is, and we start moving in the right direction, which is the direction of peace, we will let Jesus' light shine through us. And if we let that peace, that light of Jesus, help us choose peace over everything else, then eventually we'll see a change in not only ourselves, but also in the world around us. And we'll join a long line of people who chose peace when the world around them didn't. And if you think about this, the people who chose peace when the world around them chose violence and chaos, they're actually the people who changed the course of history. That's what peace can do. And I understand this isn't easy, but I promise you it can happen. And it's going to require us to be honest with ourselves and to consider maybe even making a change in the way we think about or consider some of the things we watch or listen to or read or play online. And a great first step for you today may be to talk to a trusted adult. We talk about this all the time when we gather in person, that we have small groups. And small groups are here to support and encourage and challenge you to do the big things that God is calling you to do, like choosing peace. And if you're watching this online and you're not here with us in person, we would encourage you to find a trusted adult that you could talk to. And as you talk to them, ask how this may be impacting your life. And as we wrap this up, we want you to think about this question: is what does being a peacemaker mean to you? What does being a peacemaker mean to you? Well, thank you so much for checking out this video in our series Elevate. Each week that we have kind of a standalone message, we tackle a topic. Sometimes it can be, a little bit easier. Today's is obviously a very difficult and challenging one because we're talking about the topics of violence and peace. And we know that that's something that exists in our world today. And so our hope and our prayer is that what you've heard has been beneficial and helpful to you. That as you think about the things that you hear or listen or watch or see or play or participate in online, all those things, that you would start to kind of filter those through and say, am I really looking at these things with a lens of becoming a peaceful person? Or am I just taking in all the violence and all the content without really thinking about how it affects me? Our hope and our prayer is that you would start to think about how it does affect you. And as you think about that you would start to take steps to say, hey, I need to take notice of the stuff I'm putting into my thought pattern. And I need to make sure that I'm making a focus on God and what He's called me to do, which is being a peacemaker. Because remember, being a peacemaker starts with finding peace in your own heart. And what you put in is what comes out. So our hope and our prayer for you today is that you would be a peacemaker by starting to find peace and putting that into yourself. Well, again, thank you so much for checking out this video. We hope that it's been beneficial to you. As a reminder, we do meet on Sunday nights from 6 to 8 p.m. in the youth room here at New Hope Church. We'd love to have you join us in person. But thank you so much for checking out this video, and have a great and amazing rest of your week.